Good morning, Judge Christensen.
Good morning.
I've seen you brought some guests. Would you like to introduce them to the
Well, now I
commission?
have to. Over here is my husband Jay in the white shirt. He traveled with me. He's my Uber driver. As many of you know, I had an Uber driver for some of my travels across the state. 700 miles last Tuesday, mind you. And that guy put him on for me.
Well, that's great. Well, we're ready to begin, and we're
Okay.
ready to hear your opening remarks.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. I really did truly enjoy getting a chance to visit with most everyone in your own communities. And even one guy traveled to my community, Mr. Horbach. Thank you so much. He says he travels a lot and made my life much easier. I had a jury trial going on, or a bench trial, so I appreciate that very much. Normally when I walk into a courtroom, I own it. I own it. I am comfortable. I am confident. I know exactly what I need to do. I am prepared. The attorneys have now gotten used to me, as well as I'm the judge who has read the files sometimes more than some of the attorneys. And I am very comfortable. I'm confident with my rulings, and I am comfortable asking questions if something hasn't been answered. It's role reversal today. Instead of the lawyers persuading me, it's my job to persuade you why I think I would be the best candidate for the Supreme Court. In order to engage in that type of persuasion, I have to do what my mom calls is humble bragging, and I'm not comfortable doing that, but I think that's the only way that I can perhaps get my story out to you, to help you understand why I believe I am the best person for this job. I love Carole King, I love music, and she had an album called Tapestry, and I've been thinking about my remarks for today, and I'd like to maybe illustrate that my experience is like a tapestry, and I have many different vibrant hues of all kinds of colors and sparkles, and some things are not so great. But that is what makes up the person that I am. There's three points I'd like to make with you today. One of them is I'd like to shed a little more light on me as a person, because I think you need to know the kind of person that you're considering for this position. Second thing I'd like to talk about is my professional life as a lawyer, and then as a trial court judge for 11 years, 8 as a district associate judge, mostly juvenile, and then 3 as a district judge. And finally, I'd like to make a point of how I believe I would make a difference on the Iowa Supreme Court. So as a person, I was born in Harlan, raised in Harlan, graduated high school there, met that guy back there in first grade. He got brave enough to ask me out when I was 15, and then we got married when we were 19, and we've been together ever since then. My parents were wonderful parents, and I'm going to make a couple comments that before I became an attorney even, and for sure a judge, I would not have said these things, but I've seen a lot. I have seen a lot in the world of child welfare that makes me want to say some comments about my own upbringing. I was loved. I never was hungry. I never lacked for a place to sleep. No one ever mistreated me, except the time, I may have gotten detention for chewing gum. I thought that was a mistreatment, but all in all, I had a wonderful life. And yet, when I was a child, I might not have thought so, because I didn't know any different, but I do know now. And I appreciate that opportunity my parents gave me. Jay and I are the parents of 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl. And while each one of them is a beautiful, wonderful, vibrant thread in that tapestry of my life, Nick in particular is kind of like a gold strand going through every corner of my tapestry. Nick was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at the age of 2. He was born with it, but diagnosed at 2. We had concerns when he was 1. Why isn't he walking? And some other things, and officially diagnosed at 2. We were 20 years old. We had no clue what to do. There's no such thing as Google in the early 80s. We learned by trial and error, and I think that is the accomplishment for which I am the absolute most proud, is to raise that child, who's now a young man, into a confident person who is capable of feeling loved and loving others. Jay and I always say everyone needs a little Nick in their life. I know Justice Wiggins knows him well. Neat kid, and it has complemented me. It is a part of my tapestry. If Nick could walk and talk tomorrow, I would never want to change how it's changed my life. It's made me a better person. I'd like to now transition to what's more appropriate to talk about for this job in particular. I was a lawyer for 16 years in Harlan, small town practice, did a little bit of everything to start with, and then I soon learned that my niche was family law. I also was the entire time assistant county attorney. The county attorney was my brother. And I was his assistant for those 16 years in Shelby County. As an assistant county attorney, I had lots of trial experience. I got to go in for small trials on a regular basis, and I also participated in felony level trials, jury trials, bench trials. I had a close relationship with law enforcement. I did not push everything they did. Most of the things they did, I think, were good work, and I needed to push it. There were times when, no, it was sloppy. I either noticed it or perhaps a defense attorney brought it to my attention. And those were opportunities I used to train and to teach law enforcement. Let's do it better the next time. And I have carried that through. We have to all be able to say, take a step back and acknowledge maybe something should be done differently. In my family law practice, boy, you see it all in family law world. To this day, in Harlan, if I'm at the grocery store and someone wants to introduce me to someone else, I am oftentimes referred to as my attorney. And I haven't done that for years. But it's that kind of relationship when you deal with someone with adoptions, divorces, child custody, child dispute. Those types of cases are very emotionally charged. And I enjoyed that part of my practice. Many lawyers stay away from that area, but I found it very fulfilling. After 16 years, I decided to apply, and I was chosen to be an associate judge in my district. I had criminal jurisdiction up to a Class D felony, and I had some jury trials and some experience, but by far the lion's share of my work was in the arena of juvenile court, child welfare in particular. Potawatomi is our biggest county. I had jurisdiction in all 9 counties, but I was assigned 5 of the rural counties. So for 8 years, I did the one judge, one family, which is a system that our judicial branch has adopted as a best practice. What that means is from the day a child comes into juvenile court, I am their judge until whether they are successful and reunited and the case is closed, or perhaps there's a termination of parental rights. I will be the face of that family the entire time. DHS workers change, sometimes lawyers change, sometimes we even get parents that bail on the case, but they will always see me sitting on the bench. And I think that provided a wonderful consistency for the entire process. One of the things I think that I found most effective was brought to my attention one time. Alex Haley made the comment of find the good and praise it. And I realized that's what I do. That's what I do in juvenile court. Sometimes either the services aren't available or perhaps they are not engaging in them at the level they should. But I was always able to find something good, something to praise. And you would be amazed at how that can sometimes turn the life around of a person, is that positive reinforcement and encouragement. I also think juvenile court's a fantastic way for a new young judge to acquire judicial temperament. Oh my goodness. What you can see in there, I've laughed, I've cried, I've had law enforcement remove people from the courtroom. I've had a cup of urine placed on my bench because they thought I'd want to have it, thinking I was going to test them, but I don't do that. That was for someone else to do. But it's bizarre what happens in there, and it definitely taught me, gave me a good dose of judicial temperament. In 2011, 2 times I came to the State Commission for the Court of Appeals openings, and I was nominated both times, and both times someone else got it. Nobody likes to get that call. But I did, and both times I got the call, I received the same message. The governor, was Governor Branstad at the time, would really like you to be a district judge first. I knew it. It's like, ouch, that hurts. And but what did I do? I got back on the horse and kept going. I did not give up. I did become a district judge at that point in 2015. And now in hindsight, I've learned more than ever. It's so true what was told to me. Life has a way of testing us with disappointment before trusting us with sought-after responsibility. So if I were talking to you with my credentials that I had in 2011, I would have said, I'm the person for the job, and I would have believed that. Now that I've had an additional amount of experience in the district court, I know I was wrong. I now have even more experience, and I am more qualified for that position. I'd like to take you just real briefly through a typical day in my life. 2 weeks ago on Monday, I had the Mills-Montgomery Motion Day rotation. Mills County is morning only, Montgomery afternoon, and there's travel time between the two. Mills County had a docket of about 70 cases that I needed to get through. Montgomery had about 50. Sunday night, I spent about 7 hours getting ready for the day. That's how long it takes me. I've created my own template for each and every case. So for every one of those 70 cases, I've written down the date the trial information was filed, arraignment, whether speedy was waived, what is the motion pending, who are the attorneys, what are the charges, what level of offense, and what's the code section. And that's my roadmap for each and every case. And then I just call it off, and I can tick them off. And the lawyers have gotten used to that, and they know they can ask me, hey, has speedy been waived on this case? Yes, it has been. That's the way I conduct business. The very next day, I started a murder trial for 4 days. It was a bench trial, which is a lot more work for a judge. A jury trial is where, of course, the jurors get to decide. They can give thumbs up or thumbs down. When I give my ruling, which I will be in the next few days, it will be very much detailed and very thoughtful. Final point I'd like to make is I will make a difference on the Supreme Court in three significant ways. Number one, the Supreme Court is a two-feeder system. There are two doors. Okay, there's one. But there's two doors, kind of, that can go into the Supreme Court. District court door is the one I think everyone thinks of. Murder conviction, if you don't like that what the jury did, then you appeal it and it comes here. Small claims action, eventually, if they go to district court says yes or no, even that can eventually come up to the Supreme Court. Juvenile cases are different. That is a different door. That second door through juvenile court. Over those 8 years, I entered thousands of orders and certainly hundreds of termination of parental rights orders, and those are the hot button. Those are the Class A felony of juvenile court, and many of them were appealed. Those get appealed directly from juvenile court to the Supreme Court. Now, whether or not they keep that is the Supreme Court's decision. They might give it to the Court of Appeals, or they might keep it. But the point that I'm making is there is two ways to access the Supreme Court, through district court or through juvenile court. Juvenile court cases do not go to district first. I believe I'm the only applicant who has had extensive background behind both of those doors, and I think that would be beneficial for the Supreme Court. Without Justice Zager, there will be nobody up there with trial court experience other than Justice Cady, who at the judges' meeting a couple weeks ago admitted that his experience is 25 years old. As the court is right now, no one has juvenile experience, with the exception of Justice Cady for 2 years, which was 32 years ago. I think I would definitely add to the Supreme Court in that respect. Second thing I believe I would make a difference on the Supreme Court is access to justice. Now, maybe it wouldn't be while I'm sitting up there, but you can see from my application I have been committed to improving the judicial system throughout the state of Iowa my entire career. That would not stop. I think one of the most important things I've done for access to justice was about a 5 or 6 year stint on the Pro Se Family Law Forms Committee. We were the first committee formed to actually come up with some documents, and I know Steve Eckley in the Supreme Court has made the comment that our forms are kind of the springboard for all the other forms that have since come. But that was a tremendous amount of work, and also made a tremendous difference in the court load for district court. So when we made it easier for families and participants to get through the system quicker, that allows the district court to open up for other cases that other people would like to have trial dates and have the attention of the court. And finally, I'd like to talk about geographic diversity. There was an article written 70 years ago in the ABA, in the American Bar Association journal, by Justice Jackson from the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was entitled "The County Seat Lawyer." And I read it, and I found it interesting that here we are 70 years later still comparing urban to rural, because there is still a difference. If I were appointed to the Supreme Court, I would continue to work in Shelby County, reside in Shelby County, come here as needed. Last year, you may remember there was a discussion about closing 30 courthouses. Now, maybe it didn't happen, but it certainly was considered and received as a threat to the rural communities. And maybe as a district or as a Supreme Court justice, I could not stop something like that from happening, but I want to be at the table. I think I would be a good ear and a good voice for the rural communities on the importance of having access everywhere. It's been said that access to our system, to the judicial system, is kind of like a safe highway. Everyone expects our highway, no matter where you live in our state. And I think that's true for access for justice too, no matter where you live. So how do I move from this seat up to there? I think that bench represents the face of the entire judicial branch of the state of Iowa. And I think that my input provides a unique tapestry, and that I am qualified for this job. I thank you for your time, and I hope that you'll consider me for nomination to the governor's office.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Gray? Mr. Horbach? I've been told we need to speak into the mic. Some of it isn't being picked up.
Very good. Thank you for your application. You are correct. You were traveling a lot, and I was traveling a lot, and we got together. The speed and the activity part of your job as a district court justice is very heavy. How are you going to adjust if you are in justice where it's a little bit more
I call that the rough and tumble of district court, and I'm used to it, and I like it, and it's been brought up before. Susie, are you okay with having something that isn't quite in the trenches so much? My passion is not only for what I see every day, it's for the law. I love everything about the law. So how would I transition? First of all, I know that each of the opinions that are written by the Supreme Court require a tremendous amount of collaboration, talking, research, and those kinds of things in district court. For example, last year, our district had 1 clerk for 8 district court judges and 4 district associate judges. So 12 judges shared 1 clerk. So we had to do that ourselves. So I realized at that level I would have much more time to research, which I would appreciate. But I think that the level of the cases that are brought before the court require that extra attention that we are going to be allowed through the forms of reviewing the briefs, listening to the arguments of counsel, and researching it with the assistance of a clerk. So yes, it would be different, but I would welcome it. I'm tired too from the running. I like the idea of focusing on one case instead of 70 in the morning and 50 in the afternoon.
You get to see if there's a button on the mic because
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So you would bring enormous diversity to the Supreme Court, gender, geography, family law, and criminal exposure to the criminal law system, which are all great attributes and qualities. My question is, if you've given any thought to the disparate impact that our criminal justice system has on minorities and especially African Americans, and whether you see any way forward for the Supreme Court to make a difference in the enormous disparate impact on minorities.
Thank you. Yes, first of all, I do live in a very rural district, and we don't have the diversity as much as some of the other districts. And for that, I do feel not quite as qualified to address some of those concerns. However, from the bench, I was speaking more in my practice, but from the bench, we have recently been receiving quite a bit of training on implicit bias, and I believe that's extremely important. So even if somebody comes to me and has already been arrested, perhaps either pled or charged, and I am just the sentencing judge, there's not much I can do at that point other than to promise that I will fairly sentence all individuals. However, I believe I have a duty to make sure and to pay attention to perhaps any implicit bias that may have occurred at a lower level, even if the case comes to me as late as sentencing.
Mrs. Roberts?
Good morning, Judge
Good morning.
Christensen. Thank you for being here. You and I share the common interest of serving rural communities and being sure that our communities have access to justice. Can you speak a little bit more about how you in the Supreme Court role, the administrative role, would assure that access to justice?
Like I said, I'd like to be at the table. I'm a passionate person, so even if I'm sitting on the bench, I would possess the appropriate stoicism that's not required. But there are lots of decisions made by the Supreme Court that I think are probably either around a table or in a setting of perhaps a public meeting. And I would take that opportunity, first of all, of course, to listen, because I understand it's not just the Supreme Court that can make those changes. It's a judicial, an entire branch issue. But I think the access to justice can be affected, if I was on the Supreme Court, by sending a loud and clear signal that we are going to do everything we can to make it across the board. Personally, I was on the Parents' Representation Task Force, and when we went to the Supreme Court to give them our suggested changes, one of the things they commented on was they liked the idea that we were going to require a certain amount of juvenile training for lawyers to be in juvenile court. And I right away raised my hand. I said, we need to keep in mind the rural lawyers. If you're going to require a certain kind of training, we have got to make it accessible, whether that be through the internet or have roving trainings or whatever it may be. So I think those were opportunities. And the Supreme Court listened. And that made a difference. When the rules came out, it says, when the rules came out, it was specifically stated that there will be free courses. There will be online courses. And I think that's because of something that I said. And so I think that was an opportunity for the Supreme Court. They listened, but they have to be told of those circumstances before they're aware that there's an issue.
Ms. Conover?
No questions.
Mr. Bloom?
No questions.
Mr. Goodman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask you a question about your comments about serving on the Supreme Court and your views on reduction of courthouses in the state of Iowa. Number one, I support your view that justices on the Supreme Court should be from all over the state. I think that's a benefit to the state and indeed beneficial to the Supreme Court. And I think the matter of how many courts we have in the state of Iowa is a matter of administration for the court as opposed to judicial decision. If you were on the Supreme Court faced with budgetary constraints and the issue of how many courthouses do we need, and I think we have 100 now in 99 counties, how many courthouses do you think we need in the state of Iowa?
That's a loaded question. I just know in juvenile courts, almost everything that I wanted a parent to do required them to get somewhere. Required them to get to go see their kids in maybe a facility where they're going to be observed while they're visiting. Perhaps they haven't even gotten to the point where they can see their children on their own, so they have to be supervised in a therapeutic setting. Gas, driver's license, hardly anybody had a license. I mean, a lot of people are in trouble for their driver's license, so they don't have the funds for gas or they don't have a driver's license. So in that situation, I can't think of anything more fundamental than a parent being allowed to see their child. That's an example where travel is the problem. So if at a district level regarding the courthouses, if it's so difficult for someone to even get to go see their child in a setting because of their rural placement, the same is going to be true for someone who wants to perhaps fight a speeding ticket, or maybe for their divorce case. Maybe they're spending every dime on their child support and their lawyer's fees. They can't even afford to drive to Council Bluffs, which is pretty much our hub. So I don't know. It would have to be a thoughtful consideration. I'm afraid to even give you a number. I just know that when the number 30 was thrown out there, it didn't take a lot of rocket scientists to figure out on the list of counties and their per capita numbers where the bottom 30 were. And I was fearful because many times those counties are clustered together. So that means there could be a huge geographic area that doesn't have a courthouse close. So I don't know the answer to that, but I do think with our electronic EDMS and that, I'm hopeful that we can maybe perhaps cut down some of the expenses in the courthouses, but I hate to see them go away completely.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Sukup?
Thank you.
No
But
questions.
we're sort of running out of time, and I do have a question, so I do want to ask it. I served with your dad on this court, and he was on this court, the longest serving justice, and he just died, and it was unfortunate. That's how I got to know Nick. You sort of grew up in this environment. Most of your life, your dad was on this court. How does that affect your views and how you would serve on this court?
Wasn't ready for that. He is part of my tapestry.
He did teach me a lot too, so.
I'm sorry, I'm going to get it here. The only time I get teary is about my kids or my family. I apologize, but I wasn't ready for that one. I think a lot of people think I'm sitting here today because of my dad, and I'm not. Well, maybe I am internally, but no. Sometimes when you have someone who made a huge footprint in a state like that guy did, it's hard to be outside that footprint. And so my application, I think, illustrates the work that I've done to show that I am committed to this judiciary. And yes, he has affected me, and in a positive way. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sinclair?
I think everybody should realize that it has not been that long since you lost your father, and you have our sympathy. And most of us have been through something like that, and we do understand. And it is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of empathy, and that is something that is sorely needed on the court. We do need empathetic people. Thank you.
And if he were here right now, he'd be saying, "Buck it up, Susie." So I apologize.
I think you'd say something else, but I know your dad.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Mr. Bevel?
Judge Christensen, you used the term today, sought out responsibility.
Yes.
What do you mean by that and why?
Okay, I can tell you exactly what I mean. The first time I heard that was when I applied for a district position and didn't get out of commission. It was several years ago, and that was, I considered at that point I was a lawyer. I considered being a district court judge a huge responsibility, and I was seeking it out. And so when I received that letter from my dad's friend, it resonated with me. I bet I got that 15, 16 years ago, and I have never forgotten it. It's a handwritten letter. And I loved the way it resonated with me. Today, where I am here today, I'm a district court judge. I love my job. I am comfortable in my job. But I am seeking out yet more responsibility. I don't doubt for a moment sitting up on that bench will require more responsibility. I've never let my foot up from the gas pedal, even after my father passed away. I've never let my foot up off the gas pedal, and I will continue. So that's what I meant about sought after responsibility.
We're out of time, but does someone have a question they would like to ask before we're done? Okay. Thank you, Judge Christensen.
Thank you, everyone.
And I wish you the
Thank
best
you.
of luck.